Orphaned Land with Unsung Prophets and Dead Messiahs. It's been a couple of years since their last album, All Is One, and considering this band, whenever they release an album, seem to always produce something that's either short of being a classic or a classic, this is an event. This is something that people look forward to, at least fans or people who know of this band, which, if you don't, then hopefully this review will make you interested enough in scoping them out. So that's kind of the goal here, considering they are really, really good. They hail from the Middle East. They have definitely crafted some masterpieces throughout their time, such as Mabul or even Or Warrior, and these are discs that all feel like they have a very large reality that is sometimes blinded to those of us who are outside of that area of the world. So, what does Unsung Prophets and Dead Messiahs really have to offer? This is a 13-track affair that goes longer than an hour, and their brand of progressive metal is not necessarily the traditional one, instead using Middle Eastern or Oriental metal, whatever you wish to call it, to their advantage compositionally, using that traditional music style in order to enhance their framework and enhance their song construction. And then after that, it is 100% all due to emotion. It's all due to where the music takes you. So you're not necessarily being blinded by wild time, signature, or pattern changes. Instead, it's the music itself that is really the selling point. And really on this album, we get off to a terrific start. Remember a long, long time ago, whenever I told you that a great opening song usually sets a great precedent? Well, listen to The Cave off of this album and you'll understand exactly what I mean, considering this is an 8-minute, 10-second long opener, and it does some things that are just incredibly simple, such as repeating a pattern that leads to a chorus. And you might think to yourself, well, that's pretty typical. Every band does that, or at least a lot of bands do that. What makes this extraordinary? Because I think that this is actually one of the best songs that Orphaned Land has ever made. And the reason why is because the music that they use. The reason why is the construction, the setup, everything. The way in which this song was crafted was brilliant, and it does so by really harboring and showcasing a lot of different areas of Orphaned Land's philosophy. As far as musicians are concerned, there is some heaviness here. In fact, there's a lot of heaviness here to start it off, and we're going to get a little bit more into that. But there is some great clean vocals, there's great orchestration, and just the way in which this structure is crafted is very well done. It gives you a little bit of an indication. You kind of know that something is coming, but it still feels like it blindsides you. It's one that can render you a bit emotional. It's one where the waterworks may fall. And because of that, you would think, okay, well, that's a one-time deal. But no, this is another one of those songs that has one of those moments where every single time you hear it, if you had that emotion once, there's a good chance it may hit you a second time or maybe a third, especially if you're in a very vulnerable position. And, well, believe me, for those of you who have followed me personally, this week has certainly been quite vulnerable. But we were talking about the difference in vocals. There are growls on this album which were not present on their last album, All Is One. And this was an album where it felt like that they needed to be present. That's at least what was stated by their lead singer. And I feel that that is very true considering the subject matter, which we'll get into now briefly. How good are you with philosophy? What about the allegory of the cave? The allegory that we are all chained to caves, or there's a bunch of people that are chained to caves. They actually give the shadows that they see around them names, and the outside world to them is very, very different. They're really not sure how to sort of take things in. We're very much blinded by things. This is one that's being used as a metaphor for celebrity worship, for money worship, for the world that we live in currently, that we do actually have a little bit in common with that allegory of the cave, and you get that as you go forward. Surprisingly enough, the cave, the track itself, is not directly a reference to the allegory. We'll get to that later too. However, the aggressive vocals return with tracks such as We Do Not Resist and In Propaganda, and then we get into All Knowing I, and we have maybe one of the best guitar solos that Orphaned Land has delivered throughout their career. This is one that's right in the middle portion of this song and just feels so real, and the building block to it grants it its kind of sort of pseudo-legendary status, considering the build is perfect, the solo itself just captures you. It's again one of those moments where if you're vulnerable, you might get a little teary-eyed or a little bit misty. You're going to have that a lot on this album. I'm not going to identify every place but it's something where those emotions do start to overtake you. This is an album that, while it does have the power of those unclean, those growling vocals back, does have moments of sincere vulnerability that do make you very much sort of fractured a bit as a person, or at least, again, the V word, vulnerable. Someone please buy me a synonym, I'm begging you. But then we go into Chains Fall to Gravity. You know, I have to skip over some things. I need to leave you guys some surprises, but Chains Fall to Gravity, a 9.5 minute long epic, features Steve Hackett, and it is one that exhibits where build once again comes fiercely into play. This is one where, unlike epic songs that we've heard earlier this week, it's one that's able to rise through that rank and really deliver that sort of slow burn in its opening stages, and then immediately thrusts into something that's extremely memorable. I love the way in which Hackett's influence really gives this song right here its own real unique blend of individuality, not only by comparison to the album, but by comparison to perhaps their discography. It shows that sometimes having the influence of one extra person, or just having somebody else in the studio, can sometimes affect composition and sometimes give you some fresh ideas to make an album not feel like it's the same old thing over and over again. And that's the one thing this album honestly lacks. It lacks that feeling that you are getting the same thing over and over again. The real juxtaposition, or the duality between anger and softness, you know, the sort of the very deep introspective thought process versus just really letting out all of your frustration. That duality is something that's very simple within us as people, and it makes something like something within music such as this very easy to digest, very relatable, and easy to kind of understand. We've seen where their beauty can come into play. We see it again with poets of prophetic messianism, like Orpheus is another terrific track. There's another feature on these couple of songs. See if you can figure out who it is. But then the next place I gotta go to is to Take My Hand, and Only the Dead Have Seen the End of War. Take My Hand is the literal allusion to the allegory of the cave, and it's well placed. It's one that is given a little bit of a modern touch to it, and I do like that, but still stays pretty reverent to it. It's a 6-minute track, and it's one where we're starting to get that clean voice once again. We're hearing the spoken voice, which is something that's been present from previous Orphaned Land releases. There is a lot going on here, and it's a very cool interpretation that I really, really like. It's another great song, but the latter track, Only the Dead Have Seen the End of War, I feel is a true highlight for 2 reasons. First of all, that song title, though, it is quietly devastating and exceptionally true, but second of all, this is a growl fest. This is a duel between Orphaned Land's vocalist as well as Tomas from At the Gates. So, whoa. It's something that feels very different, and it is extremely different. This is the heaviest track on the album, and easily one that shows itself as a true highlight on an album full of highlights. And that's one thing that is pretty... It's an easy way to explain the album. It's an album that where the highlights that you hear are highlights of an album full of highlights. I just said highlight way too many times. Finishes off strong, although some may say it's a little lacking. I like what they do here. I like what the sort of the spoken word message is of the manifest / epilogue. I feel that it's one that has a lot of doubt within it, but also there's a little bit of hope. You know, there are some messages that you hear, such as the Master is now taking on his new form, that really shows that it's kind of a dice roll whether or not that new form is going to be negative or positive, but perhaps... and then maybe this is just me being philosophical, perhaps the master is something that we can actually control within our own minds, because our master is something that we are kind of in league to sort of produce and in league to sort of create. And if we create, or if we subscribe, or, you know, if our master takes on the form of something positive, or if it takes on a more peaceful ideal, then perhaps the world will follow. Even though, you know, the world that we live in leaves us clouded by a lot of doubt that even such a thing is possible. So, a lot of philosophical messages here. There's obviously a little bit of assault on social issue or political issue, particularly, which can certainly... There's certainly some barriers here for those who are perhaps listening outside of the Middle East that don't know very much about what's going on over there, and I will also warn with this, have only been told what has been told on your television screen. There's a lot more than just what meets the eye. And I like that this album not only kind of, for at least me, that was a very muted ideal. I focused a lot more on the philosophy of it because that's just something I like. I like that a lot more than really being assaulted by political efforts in somebody's SJW crazy playbook. That was not a knock, by the way. This is just an album that feels a lot more interesting. It goes a lot more places. It flows a lot better. It's able to kind of lobby between the positive or, very growling and forward angry tracks and the sort of more regressive, very vulnerable, very beautiful tracks very, very well. They're able to do that within songs. They're also able to do it within the album. This is an album that feels like it's on rarefied ground, like it's on surprising turf. And I have to say that the most positive aspect of this album is the fact that after you complete it, you don't want to take a break. You want to go back. You want to digest it all over again. It feels like so much to digest, but in reality, it's also very easy to digest because the music, oh God, the music, the captivation point is really the construction. They are amazing musicians, and that is, even if you don't necessarily fully agree with lyricism, or even if you don't fully buy into some of the philosophy, that is what brings you in. That's what brings the bacon home. It's unlike other albums where you may get those messages, and you might not like those messages, but then it doesn't have very interesting music to sort of drive kinesis or drive attention away from it. That's the difference between one album being bad in that regard and another album, such as this one, being very, very good. This is a 29 out of 30. Why it is not perfection is because I feel like there are some second half tracks that are just quite not as memorable as some of the previous. This is also a score where it's still very, very early. I don't want it to end up being an astonishing type problem. I don't think it's going to be, but this is a score that could go up by the end of the year. And it could actually be a perfect 30 out of 30 by the time 2018 is over. You could buy this album on Amazon. There are links down there for you to do so. There's a US, a Canadian, a Canada, and a UK store. This is the first real piece of essential, like, you should go out and buy this album music that we've gotten here so far in 2018. I'm sure there have been other examples, like that Foot album was a good example, but that was not yet available to buy. That's a Bandcamp thing. Make them famous, by the way. But Orphaned Land somehow, some way, just continues to show themselves to be one of the best kept secrets still in metal, because they're not one that is very well known still to this day, which is wild. That should change, but also just someone who's very deserving of the title of one of the best prog bands, or one of the best metal bands on the planet today. I want to know what you guys think about it, though. What did you think about Unsung Prophets and Dead Messiahs by Orphaned Land? Tell me in the comments. I'll be there. Or be square. I'm CoverKillerNation, by the way. I'll talk to you guys next time. Take care.